Hello, everybody. Mick here. Hope you're doing well today. Um, for the next several vlogs, we are going to discuss personality disorders and or what I will call personality conditions. And I'll explain later on why that I have that difference. When I see it that way, everyone has a personality, but some personality characteristics are not beneficial or conducive to healthy interactions with others. Okay, excuse me. I'm already starting out. I got to drink water. Okay. Now there's a caveat that's in order here, so that we're starting these vlogs on personality disorders. It is to warn you that if you hear a descriptive set of characteristics or traits in relation to a particular personality condition, which from here on out I'll either shorten to PC or PD, okay? Personality disorder or personality condition. I'll shorten as either. But it does not necessarily mean we can go around diagnosing others, with a PD. Um, Say, for example, we are discussing narcissistic personality conditions or personality condition, and you come to realize there are some defining descriptors in that condition that seem to fit your mate or someone you may know. Uh, it is wise not to label, okay? So all of these PDs have a dimensional aspect to them, okay? What I'm a continuum, this dimensional aspect, meaning some may lie somewhere either closer to the left of the spectrum as opposed to the far right on the spectrum, okay? It takes particular psychological tests and testing, and I'm telling you, many sessions one on one with someone, but before clear diagnostic can be made. An example here to explain this even further is, because I'm really going to stress this point, not to go out and start diagnosing people. You know, uh, let's take MPD, narcissistic personality disorder, again, for example. Everyone has narcissistic characteristics, and it is necessary for our healthy ego to have a certain level, okay? But if someone who is overly grandiose and seems to always want to brag and be the center of attention, but if there's someone like that, which is detrimental to his relationships and causes problems, then that is when it becomes a clinical matter, okay? And I'll get into the criteria a little bit later on. Um, or let's say it's someone too a narcissistic. We have vulnerable narcissists that is always presenting themselves as the perpetual victim in order to maintain attention. Then yes, again there may be a problem. So there's this continuum, okay? A degree to which we all fall along the spectrum of particular personality traits. In order for a PC or a PD to exist and to be diagnosed, like I said, there are certain criteria. Now there are 6 criteria, and number one, it's the personality is this enduring pattern of behavior. It must not, it must not deviate markedly from the expectations of the person's culture or what others would consider normal by societal standards. Okay, so we kind of all know what we're talking about there. The second thing is this maladaptive behavioral pattern. you're going to see with these personality disorders, these maladaptive behavioral patterns, they're inflexible and are pervasive across personal and societal situations. Okay? The number three one is this personality condition, whatever they have, will lead to significant clinical distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other life areas, as I mentioned before. Number four, these patterns have to be traced back. It's very important. These patterns have to be traced back to adolescence or early childhood. It can't be a recent occurrence in that respect. The fifth one is this pattern of personality or behavior cannot be better explained by another mental disorder, like bipolar 1, bipolar 2, or maybe a neurological lesion that they have. And I've known instances of this happening. And the last one, number six, is drugs or other substances cannot be involved. Okay, so those are the six basic criteria that go across all these 10. We have 10, which I'll talk about throughout these series of vlogs. But this basic six, this criteria has to go with each and every single personality disorder. So I said there are 10. There are 10 PDs, and they're divided up into three main categories or clusters. We're called clusters for PDs. There's three clusters, A, B, and C. And they're listed in the DSM-5, and I didn't bring it. It's up on the shelf, behind me. But cluster A is what's known as, it's described as an odd eccentric sort of grouping, okay? These are very odd eccentric personalities. Cluster B is dramatic and erratic, which I like. I tend to study B a lot more than I do A or C. It's kind of interesting, but I do, know fairly, in an expert way about the other ones. And lastly, C is the anxious, fearful personality disorders, which I counsel from an developmental attachment perspective, and anxious, fearful, or avoidant fearful, fits in with that. So these three clusters, they contain the 10 different ones. So cluster A is odd-eccentric, okay, and it includes a paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal, okay. Now don't worry, I'll explain each in detail over the next several vlogs. And cluster B, where we're going to be at today, is dramatic erratic, and it includes antisocial PD. We call it antisocial now, which is a nice way of saying psychopathic, sociopathic, or Machiavellianism. And these three, sociopathic, psychopathic, and Machiavellianism, is what we call the dark triad. And I'll be covering psychopathy today, and sociopathy today, because it seems to be the most popular among listeners. The second one in cluster B is borderline personality disorder. Now borderline is somewhere between neurotic and psychotic, behaviors, and it doesn't quite fit into either category. The third one in this group, this B group, is my favorite, which is histrionic, meaning someone who is overly dramatic, the drama type, and they have a slight hysterical twist to them in their personality. They're typically overreacting, okay? And the last one is narcissistic, which is also popular with listeners in that. Cluster C, which is the anxious, fearful personality disorders. It includes avoidant, dependent, and OCD PD, okay? Obsessive compulsive disorder, personality disorder, okay? It's different. It's markedly different from the OCD, which is repetitive or persevative, meaning things are done over and over and over, persevative, okay? So uh, I want to note that people can have a combination of PDs. It can be a combination of them. They're not just found, by themselves. And again, it's measured on a dimensional type structure, where to a certain degree, that PD is present, either far left or center or extremely right, meaning very pronounced. Okay, and also PDs are different from mental health disorders like depression. You remember I told you I was going to call them conditions, PCs, conditions. Uh, so they're different from mental health disorders like depression, bipolar, PTSD, addictions, etc. Okay, but then again, there may be a combination of these along with PDs. It's what we label as comorbidity. Imagine, if you will, a patient having bipolar along with a borderline presentation, borderline PC, or even greater. I've had two or more PCs together, like a borderline and let's say an avoidant. These come together, or dependent, very much. You'll see that dependency in those borderlines, and this is part of that. So two PCs come together, and alongside, you'll have several mental disorders, like you will see the symptoms of depression, anxiety, alcohol use disorder, addictions, and PTSD. Okay, so it makes for a very difficult clinical picture in order to make sure of correct diagnoses along with the appropriate treatment plans. But it does happen, and that is why assessment is always an ongoing process in therapy. So, it can be a little complicated, a little complex. Okay. Again, I want to stress that these short tutorials that I'm doing here, uh, don't go out and start diagnosing others. Okay. It takes years and years of education and clinical experience to come to diagnostic conclusions. I won't talk about misdiagnoses or overdiagnoses or underdiagnoses, but that does occur. But like I said, in order to meet the thresholds for those PCs, those 6 criteria that I rattled off earlier, they must be met. Plus, there's sub criteria in each of the PCs. Okay, it kind of makes sense, I guess, in that respect. Okay, getting back here. I can read. I'm pretending like I can read without my glasses, which I can't. Many researchers and clinicians, I told you I was going to explain this, they consider these personality disorders as a condition, even though we call it a disorder. A condition is thought to be more intractable, and harder to treat, because it typically is a lifelong chronic trait, as opposed to an acute or intermittent disorder. See, personality is a lifelong construct as it remains constant across time and situations, okay? Um, Meaning all our lives, our personalities stay fairly stable and consistent as the years pass, the sands of the hourglass. And they pretty much stay consistent within those differing situations, okay? Now, mental infirmaries like depression, anxiety, adjustment disorders, or let's say traumatic responses, they can be overcome in therapy. And they may wax and wane for some, or maybe just once in or twice they come in appearance in life, okay? They pop up. But our personalities, whether healthy or maladaptive, and when I say maladaptive, I mean adaptively bad, that's who we are, okay? So yes, however, PDs can, with the proper treatment and the right clinician, because it's tough. It's tough to treat these, and it takes a lot of patience and a lot of insight and a lot of clinical work and a lot of education. Typically over the years, the patient can become adjusted enough for them to recognize and marginally change for the better. See, people with these lifelong conditions do not know that they are mentally afflicted. They're clueless about that, okay? Even though everyone else, we know that there's something wrong, with me. But see, I'm the last guy to know because it's my personality and I grew up with it. And it's very normal to me. So that's why I view these personality abnormalities as conditions and not so much as disorders, okay? So, all right. So now, we're going to finally get into our antisocial PC, and so we call it antisocial, but it's kind of a nice way of saying, we label it in the DSM-5 as antisocial, but it's just a nice way of saying sociopathic or psychopathic or Machiavellianism, okay? And it's what we call the dark triad of the cluster B types. Now, psychopathic or sociopathic personalities affect about 5% of our society. And alarmingly, the number is growing within the female population. There are some guesses as to why, but the major consensus is a societal shift in gender roles. Now we hear the labels of psychopathy and sociopathy as interchangeable terms, okay? But they are to me, they're markedly different. And what it does is that revolves around empathy. Again, remember this is dimensional, okay? On a continuum of how less or how much someone has these trait-like features. The best way to describe the difference between sociopathy and psychopathy, it's because it's hard to find a clinical discernment between the two, is psychopathy sees others as insignificant. Others are flotsam, kind of like gum on one shoe, okay? And sociopathy, sociopaths, they see societal rules as insignificant and not necessarily applying to them. So psychopathy involves individuals directly, and sociopathy is directed toward societal rules and edicts, which may involve others to lesser degrees. Okay. I want to give you an example here. If you remember the series, The Sopranos. The main character was Tony Soprano. He was the head of his regional organized crime family in New Jersey. You know, I love the series. Uh, he had empathy and he cared for others, but when it came to breaking the law, it just didn't faze him. One iota. He rationalized or he intellectualized, and these are defensive mechanisms. So he rationalized and intellectualized these sociopathic behaviors. Some of you may remember Walter White in Breaking Bad. Okay, these are good examples of sociopaths. There's really not any concern for society and the welfare of others. Uh, they personally don't know. Walter White, he wasn't concerned about really how his methamphetamine was affecting people downstream. People downstream, okay? So, but they had empathetic feelings, even sympathy for others, even though at times they were cruel, but they did it out of business necessity, okay? Now, not all psychopaths are criminals, and not all criminals are psychopaths, but a fair number of the incarcerated have higher antisocial scores than the norm. Uh, but they are what I would consider sociopaths, SPs, even though we have psychopaths in prison, okay? I think about 20% of our prison population are considered antisocial. Uh, uh, I'm pretty sure that's it. But actually, the research indicates that psychopaths tend to assume leadership positions within our society, something that we really don't think about. So these leadership positions, they're politicians at every level. When I'm saying every level, I mean like could be school board, could be municipality, county, all the way up to federal. So at every level, they're there. CEOs or higher level managerial positions. We have men there. Law enforcement, clergy, attorneys, soldiers, social workers, teachers, and such. So we normally don't think of these positions or these people having sociopathic traits, but they're actually they're more concentrated in these arenas than they are in prison, okay? Um, that's because, these psychopaths, uh, they have a lot of interaction with others in a controlling manner. So let's switch our minds away from psychopaths just being serial killers. They're more pervasive than just those Ted Bundys or John Wayne Gacy's or Jeffrey Dahmer's, kind of off the top of my head that we kind of know of, right? So, like I said, 5 people per 100, 5% have these antisocial behaviors. But, I really think that's a low number. I think it's more around 7 or 8%, which is, very high from a clinical perspective. When we look at it, because only 1% of our population has schizophrenia, right? And we have like 4%, have bipolar disorder, bipolar 1 or 2, or cyclothymia, in that respect. So when you start looking at those and then start thinking, wow, we have 7 to 8%, are thought to be psychopathic, antisocial types. Okay. So now I want to dive into psychopathy. I'm gonna kind of have to stay with my notes a little more instead of rambling on like I have been. But we're going to get into it, and I think we're going to talk about some of these very these descriptors that we have. Getting into the traits or the characteristic, the weeds, if you will. The psychopath has no or very little empathy uh, for the life or welfare of others. That is the number one main indicator, okay? They have no conscience. I got to make that clear. I've heard it said that it's not about them knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's just that they don't care, okay? It's immaterial to them. I mean, they know what right is, they know what wrong is, but it's not germane to them. Yes, they can be married, they can have children, they can be in relationships, but that's a cover or to look normal, sort of, you know. Also, I feel that an absence of anxiety is another clear indicator. It's a sort of a coolness that they have, you know, about them. They appear in this stoic control when others are having an emotional response toward an alarming situation. You know, they maintain their poise. See, they don't have the ability to feel like others. You know, this sympathetic take that most of us have. And I'll explain that why that is later on when we discuss etiology or the reasons why someone may develop psychopathy. But this dissociated coolness, right? This disconnection to others, I think leads them to having a need to seek high levels of sensation to get their systems up, to satisfy a higher threshold for stimulation. Okay, and there are some others here. So some more what we call sub-criteria. You know, remember the six main for each personality disorder. So these are sub-criteria now for uh, psychopathy, um, which I think they have a tendency to cross over into Machiavellianism and narcissism, which we'll cover in the next vlog. Um, and what that is it's self-centeredness, and you know we all know them because you know they're the most important. You know, all eyes are on them, and they're going to have uses for others. They want to be seen as the most important. And another one is a lack of deep personal relationships. People have their uses, and those uses need to relate directly to the psychopath's benefit. Okay. A third one here is a superficial poise and charm where they pretend they're paying attention to you, wooing others in a sense, but in reality, they're disingenuous, and this attention has ulterior motives for the use. Now there are some researchers who consider this as as a main indicator. You know, one of the main indicators, and you know, and I do agree. So maybe you know, so maybe the top three indicators of psychopathy or lack of empathy or just conscience. You know, um, another one is they're very controlling. You know, they're very controlled. Excuse me, in alarming situations. So they have this coolness about them. And this third one, you know, this charming poise or this charming effect on others. So, you know, we'll also find that the psychopath, you know, is both guiltless and dishonest. Okay, uh, manipulation is the key, but the person, and this is sad, but the person typically will not know this until it's over. Mm. So one thing I want to be clear here is psychopaths, they choose their prey, the vulnerable, the segregated, and they will play on that weakness to control. They tend to have you know, they tend to have higher IQ than the sociopath. Remember the differences? Uh, remember, sociopaths, they'll break the law, and eventually, they'll get caught because they're criminals, whereas psychopaths are not necessarily criminal. Just they're devious with deep down, cold, callous temperaments, which comes across as warm and endearing. Okay. What's funny is if they do go to jail, literature refers to them as unsuccessful psychopaths. So I remember reading that, years ago, as opposed, of course, to the successful who are able to navigate and swim the waters of substantial personal gain by deceitful practices. And they're the corporate, the legal, the political, clerical, educational, or instrumental powers in our nation. They appear same as compassionate because they've studied and copied those empaths over time. Us who are empathetic, we're empaths, and they'll study over time, and they fake the caring and concern. It's acting. Okay. In the end, they don't care if they hurt you emotionally, financially, psychologically, or even physically. Um, they'll deny any involvement or turn it around and convince others that they are the blame. Uh, we're all familiar with the gaslighting technique, right? In the beginning of a relationship, um, they may appear to be reliable, a go-to person, but in the end, they are discovered as being unreliable, fictitious, because they have a lack of guiding values and concern for others. Like I said, some of these traits, they're crossover characteristics for both Machiavellianism and narcissism, but they also appear in psychopathy. Okay. We're gonna do something here that I always love. Theodore Million. I'll talk a little bit about him here, but he is just a venerable personality researcher. He's passed on now, okay, but he's got these ways he breaks things down, and what I feel like are very useful terms that we can relate to, and he's got these 9 psychopathic subtypes. I'm going to go through real quick. So let's talk about Theodore here real quick, and we'll take a look at these. So Theodore Million was he's an American psychologist, famous for his research on personality. Yeah, and he did more than that, but he wrote about 30 books and a couple of hundred scientific articles, and his classification of personality disorders, it's well known worldwide, and it's influenced a lot of diagnostic manuals. So we're going to highlight the research he conducted on these 9 subtypes in this psychopathic subtypes. So for personality disorders, Million, he saw them as mental illnesses, okay? In that, so more than disorders like I do, I call them conditions. And these people that do it, I want you to kind of understand, they promote this vicious cycle, these circles at levels of functioning. What I mean by that is we'll see inner turmoil within a group, and if there's a psychopath there, they are surreptitiously, am I saying that right? Yeah, surreptitiously, they're behind that group's dysfunction. It's second nature to them. So it's worth classifying that these subtypes, that we're going to talk about, they're not mutually exclusive. They just don't stand alone. In fact, it's quite normal for a person with a psychopathic condition to share several of them. So we're going to kind of get into these here, and the first one we're going to talk about is called the unprincipled psychopath. So I'm just going to so we can associate this type of psychopathic personality with narcissistic traits. They're people who tend to stay successfully outside legal boundaries and are indifferent to the welfare of others. Hence, they don't experience remorse when they manipulate or exploit the people around them. Okay. They tend to, they have this sort of arrogant or grandiose sense of self-worth. It's a phony, dishonest social style, and they don't submit themselves to treatment. We won't see them in therapy, okay, unless they get arrested or get caught and they have to go, so they're reluctant, what we call reluctant clients. In addition, they're often the ones who set the pace in relationships, so that once they get the benefit they want from this relationship, they'll end it. They can care less about the hurt that they cause. Okay. The next one is what's called the underhand furtive psychopath, what I call the sneaky psychopath, and this is pretty good. It has a social and a very social and pleasant appearance to them, which deep down it hides their impulsive tendencies, the aggressiveness, and this lack of confidence. These things are buried deep within inside them, okay? But they appear other, because they're sneaky, they're furtive, and this. They're also, deeply resentful and show passive aggressive tendency toward family members and people close to them. The furtive, they'll also seek persistent attention and experiences that give them a certain rush. With females, I'm going to talk here. In addition, they often display, seductive behavior and maintain superficial and fluctuating relationships. I think we'll see this a lot more, these psychopathic, this sneaky, furtive in females, okay? Because females, psychopaths, they'll use sex as a weapon to blackmail or to extort their control over useful people like bosses or those in high places. This furtive psychopath, they kind of resemble that histrionic personality. They're very, very dramatic in what they do, and they're usually irresponsible and non-compliant in passive-aggressive ways. I remember, I don't know if y'all remember, but it was two figure skaters. I don't know if it was they were getting ready, they were qualifying for the Olympics or what it was, but Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding, okay? And Nancy Kerrigan, she was just graceful and looked so much more elegant as compared to Tanya Harding. Tanya Harding was kind of, she was shorter and a little more bulky, but they were great skaters. But what Tanya Harding did is she hired somebody to go out and kneecap Nancy Kerrigan, okay? Of course, she got caught, so I don't know if you remember that. So that could be it kind of just popped in my mind. That could be kind of a good example of a furtive, sneaky type of sociopath, which I think is more, you'll see more in the female domain. We have what's called the risk-taking psychopath, okay? The impulsive types. This also involves risky situations. Remember I talked about they need to be stimulated, okay? They do it to feel alive and motivated rather than to gain advantages of prestige, if you think about it. they're reckless and insensitive to situations where others would feel, kind of in danger or afraid, and they feed off of that. They feed off of the other people's fears. They seek out the vulnerable and the malleable. Okay, we talked about that, and typically they'll use them in their risky behaviors by using their money or possessions or positions of power and influence. Uh, they want someone else to take the fall if it goes sideways. Okay, uh, or they really need to feel that fear in others that they produce or manufacture. Okay, so they're going to set others up for risky situations, and they'll be a part of it. But if something goes sideways, they're going to they're going to jump ship like rats. Okay. The greedy, the greedy psychopath is the next one, I think. Pretty sure it is. Yeah. Okay, the greedy psychopath. They feel like life hasn't given them what they deserve. Like it stripped them of their rights. They believe that others have been given more than they have, and that they've never had a good chance at life. Okay, it's not always they want for themselves what others have so much, but to take away from the other, so both do not possess the coveted item. If I'm explaining that right, okay, it's not that they have something like, you know, more prestige, more power, more money, they're smarter. They want, because they know that they can't attain that, so they want to take it away from them. So yeah, if somebody has greater status in that respect, and they the psychopath, they know they can never obtain that status. Then they'll try to undermine or sabotage the person's notoriety. So I'm watching boaters out there fishing. It's 39 degrees outside and on the lake fishing. So more was yeah. So what they'll want to do is their motivation is a desire to make up for all that they've been deprived of. It's through criminal acts or downright evil acts that lacks morality or ethical regard. They'll seek compensation for the emptiness of their lives is what they're trying to do. They're trying to fill this hole to compensate in there. In addition to, they just don't care about the transgressions they commit against society. Um, the weak psychopath. Hmm. I'm gonna skip that one. Okay. I think I'm gonna skip that one. And we're gonna go down here to the explosive. Well, the explosive is the opposite of the weak. So let's go down to the ones I think are everybody's pretty familiar with. It's called the harsh and the malevolent psychopath. So, and then we have the tyrannical after that, I think. So the harsh psychopath shows their rejection in a confrontational manner. Everything and everyone is a reason for them to fight. With them, there's always a good excuse to vent their annoyance. This psychopathic profile has ongoing differences with others. They magnify even the smallest actions, and they live in a constant and bitter struggle with others. In addition, they have little remorse and awareness of the discomfort that they cause. Okay, so my two here, I'm going to cover the malevolent and the tyrannical. Should be, yeah. And I'm going to kind of do it in my own words a little bit here, but it's a million. Um, so the malevolent psychopath. These, the malevolent, they are really vindictive and hostile. Okay, um, their impulses are discharged in this malignant and destructive rebellion against conventional social life. See, they don't trust others, and they anticipate betrayal and punishment from others. And they've acquired this cold cruelty, if you will, and an intense desire to get revenge for alleged, pretty much, they allege, I'd call it actual mistreatment suffered in childhood. Okay, so they adopt this attitude of resentment and a propensity to pick on and attack those that they wish to destroy. Now I'm going to combine that one with the tyrannical psychopath. And together, to me, you'll get those two together a lot, and they are the most dangerous. So along with the malevolent psychopath, the tyrannical is one of the most threatening and cruel among the psychopathic subtypes, okay? They can both relate, they both relate to others in an intimidating, threatening, and overwhelming ways. They're often accusatory and abusive, and invariably they're destructive too. But unlike the malevolent subtype, the tyrannical one is stimulated by resistance or weakness. Okay, think of that. That's what stimulates them. Others, their weakness, their resistance, which will increase their force of the attack or effort, rather than stopping or softening it. They'll just get more and more physically abusive or verbally or abusive, okay? So the malevolent and the tyrannical is what we typically classify as the killer, the arsonist, the rapist, or the sadistic type, okay? So, dun, dun, dun. Now, we're going to talk about etiology, and I'm going to, about probably 10 minutes here, cover this, and that'll be it. But hopefully 10 minutes. But in their book, okay, Glenn and Rain, they point out they're called two factors of psychopathy. There's two factors. Factor one concerns two facets. Okay, there's two factors with two facets. Okay, so don't get confused here. So factor one, they have two facets of interpersonal and affective categories. Interpersonal facets, it relates to relationship interactions, and affective facets have categories. Trying to get this kind of square away in my mind here because I want to explain this. They have categories involving emotions or lack of emotions that's displayed by the psychopathic. Okay, so I got it. So interpersonal facets, relate to relationship interactions, and affective facets, they have these categories that involve emotions or lack of emotions that's displayed by the psychopathic. So Glenn and Rain, they define factor one, the personal and the affective facet, as the central traits. These are the central traits for the psychopath. Okay. Now, factor two also, like I said, has two facets, which includes lifestyle and antisocial traits. However, factor two bleeds over into sort of Machiavellianism and narcissism, but also it does include some traits of psychopathy. But we're just going to list these factor one traits before we talk about the causes of psychopathy. Okay, so I'm gonna read this here. Okay. Now, in interpersonal dealings or relationship interactions, the psychopath will display superficial glib, grandiose self-worth, pathological lying, right? And manipulative behaviors. That's in the relationship, dealing with others. In the emotional realm, there is a lack of remorse or guilt, or shallow affect, or shallow emotions, callousness, lacking empathy, and failure to accept responsibility. Okay, so I think those are very important. I wanted to point those out because before we got down into the etiology of it, but I thought those were very important for you to understand and remember. Nothing, like I said, they don't have a conscience. Nothing really affects them except for losing or not getting in the way. It's all about winning, but sometimes they win. They may not win, but it doesn't really affect them. So, okay. So now, what causes psychopathy? We suspect around 7 to 8% of the American population is considered psychopathic. And this comes about through heredity, genetic sharing, and also environmental conditions that are just unfavorable to healthy normal development. Researchers, lost my train of thought there, sorry. Researchers, through twin studies, here we go. So, the monozygotic, identical, and dizygotic fraternal twins, there were research for them, kind of help them parse out the genetic versus the environmental correlations for psychopathy. It's sort of a nature versus nurture exercise, in that. I remember that was my very first topic to write about in undergrad psychology. It was Introduction to Psychology 101, Nature versus Nurture. And I'm going to tell you, even in my past 2 master's programs and doctoral candidacy, it was still very much a debated topic. And in all the literature it is today, that nature versus nurture. So it's funny how it's been around for all these years. It's been around a long time. But here's the bottom line, according to the most recent research. It's going to blow your mind. Psychopathy is caused by both genetic transference and environmental influencers at a 50-50 ratio. Ta-da! There you have it. You heard it from me. Psychopathy is caused by both genetic transference and environmental influencers at a 50-50 ratio. One just doesn't have a greater influence. It's the combination of biological constructs and environmental context. Okay, so there's really no silver bullet, I guess, in this respect for that, but it's a lot like that. Now, I'm not going to get into the behavioral or the molecular genetics, nor will I delve into the shared versus non-shared environmental context, because this is just an overview, and I think if I would lose most of you if I started talking about alleles and SNPs and polymorphisms and genotypes and endophenotypes and endocrine factors, okay? So here's the deal. Scientists have identified 8 genes which show influential correlations for psychopathy that can be inherited, passed from one generation to the next, or even two or three now progenies. Okay, so I could have got it from my great grandfather, right? Three, four, three, yeah, three great grandfather. These genes, what we found, they impact the neuronal development, our brain development in utero and in postnatal periods. uh, these 8 genes, they'll control the levels of neurotransmitters, uh, namely dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine, okay, as well as the production of enzymes in the brain, which are basically, inhibitors for neural firing. They're kind of like I don't want to call them the garbage men, but they collect up the excess or they break down the excess neurotransmitters in that. So they went about to find these genes with 2 methods. The first one is candidate genes, okay? And the second method they use is called genome-wide studies. With candidate genes, what they did is they picked out genes they suspected, that would be associated with psychopathy. Then they took these identified genes of these psychopathics, or people with psychopathic personality characteristics or constructs, and compared these specific candidate genes to control studies, which are people without psychopathy, to see if they were see where the differences were, okay, and they compared them. So it was pretty good, and that was molecular. Now in behavioral genetics, they use the GWS, right? So the genome-wide study, and so they took the entire genome of both psychopathic individuals and normal controls, and they used computers to compare the differences in genetic structure. So that's how to date they have identified the 8 genes for possible influence for psychopathy. They're also, I did. I put this out for a reason, didn't I? There are also particular areas of the brain which, through fMRI studies, scanning, shows anomalies in structural development. Okay, so let's see here. The 3 main areas, if I can get this right, so I can show you, is the posterior, which means to the rear, posterior cingulate gyrus. It's back in here. Oops, sorry. Back in there. So you can see real good. And the right dorsal, okay, right is because I've got the right part of the brain here. The right dorsal means top. Anterior means front. Cingulate right here, okay? So basically right in here. So these are gray matter areas, what we call gray matter, and I'll explain it in just a second. And then, the amygdala, which is right down here, okay? This almond shaped area right there, okay, on that. And so these are the 3 areas in the structure of the brain that demonstrated reduced gray matter, which is gray matter is the actual cell body, the neuron itself, not including the axons and the dendrites. But these gray matter concentrations, when compared with normal scans, they were reduced. They were smaller. So these 3 areas of the brain, they had reduced gray matter, and this may explain, because I kind of know what these areas do for us. It may explain the callous and unemotional traits of the psychopath, because these limbic areas structures, have been shown to regulate and moderate or modulate emotions. Okay, so in that. Now, I'm not going to talk about the hormonal because I'm going to get into that with Machiavellianism and narcissism, and I think that would be better to bring in there. Plus, we're getting kind of long-winded here, so I'm going to wrap this up here real quick. Uh, so, now, environmental contexts include abuse, neglect, severe corporal punishment, criminal and this is my favorite, criminal and antisocial modeling from caregivers and peers seem to be the main culprits inducing these behaviors. You know, a family of psychopaths, right? So we just pass it on. Not only is it in the genes, but it's in the environment. I shouldn't laugh because this is serious. Now, just because a young child is subjected to these harsh conditions, it does not mean that they will turn into a psychopath. Also, for those who have genetic influence, it doesn't mean they'll grow up to be a psychopath, okay? Really, what it takes is environmental conditions along with genetic susceptibility to engender a psychopathic behavior or conditions, okay? So I'm telling you, rich, poor, middle class, nobility, highly intelligent, average intelligence, it really doesn't matter. They're all at a higher risk if these genetic attributes and ecological standards are met. These are the ingredients, and if they're baked correctly, voila, we have a psychopath, right? Now, treatment for a psychopath is intractable. Biologically, they cannot be changed unless some chemical or structural alteration occurs. Just think about what I said. Chemical or structural alteration occurs. So I want you to be aware, be intuitive. Most people, after they've been a victim of a psychopath, they relate this inner voice at the beginning that something was amiss, okay? So, I've heard that. They just knew from the beginning there just wasn't something right. But, like I said, they prey on the vulnerable, on the segregated, and they pick their prey. They're very good at it. It's second nature. All right. Now, you can reach out to me here. I'm going to wrap it up. You can reach out to me at 256-599-0291 or email me at agapecounselor@outlook.com. Our next vlog, we're going to continue the dark triad discussion of Machiavellianism and narcissism, okay? Maranatha, guys. Love you.